welcome everybody. We're so thrilled to have you here with us today. I am Laura De Palma, the marketing manager here at Renew International. For some of you, Joseph Nuzzi needs no introduction, but if you do, he is our newest president and executive director and an experienced Theology on Tap facilitator. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover a few brief housekeeping items. If I can ask you to please keep yourselves muted during the main webinar, just so that the conversation can flow smoothly, I would very much appreciate it. The chat box will be open for the whole session, so if you have any questions that you want to present, any comments, any technical difficulties, please feel free to put any of that in the chat box. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session, so I'll be sure to answer as many of those chat box questions as possible during that time. Of course, during the Q&A itself, you're also welcome to unmute yourselves and ask any questions if you'd like to. But for the remainder of the webinar, we do ask you to please keep yourselves muted. And the session will be recorded for anybody who couldn't join us today, or if any of you love it so much that you want to share it with others or watch it again. So please keep an eye out for that link in the coming days. That's everything I have for you. So again, if you need any help or have any questions, feel free to type to me in the chat box. Otherwise, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joseph Nuzzi, the one and only.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Joe Nuzzi, and as Laura said, I'm the new president and executive director here at Renew International, and I'm going to be presenting Theology on Tap, some tips for making it a great experience, hopefully in your communities. And what I'd like to do is just extend that, one, welcome, and two, a little more of an introduction, so you know who's talking to you. Yes, I'm here at Renew after many years, but I've spent the last 25 years in parish ministry, mainly in adult faith formation. So I have been directly involved with the newly rebranded OCIA, for those of us who have been around, the RCIA, young adult ministry. So Theology on Tap is something that I have done consistently in my career since I left Renew 25 years ago. And I've also worked in the area of small Christian communities. Why is this presentation being done by Renew International? Well, that's an interesting story. Renew International, in conjunction with the Archdiocese of Chicago, where Theology on Tap began in 1981, worked out an arrangement where Renew could help facilitate Theology on Tap spreading beyond the Archdiocese of Chicago. Chicago did not want to have the bandwidth to be able to help train people and get resources to people for Theology on Tap. And it's exactly what Renew has always done. And so Renew International now has the license to help people implement Theology on Tap. It does dovetail with the mission of Renew. Renew has always been, our core mission is to help parishes build small Christian communities. Our mission is to help parishes become more evangelizing, stronger, more vibrant communities. And Theology on Tap is a tactic to achieve that, specifically for young adults. Okay, so there is the mission of Theology on Tap and its original inception and Renew International's mission go hand in hand. So that's why this presentation is being done from here. So what I'd like to do today is kind of hopefully give you some very real concrete suggestions in ways to make Theology on Tap a successful endeavor for you. Okay, so I'm going to be going back and forth, sharing my screen, hopefully successfully. Thank God Laura's here to help me out in case I mess something up. Everybody can see my screen again?
So far, so good.
Yeah, we're doing this more as kind of a group conversation versus a traditional webinar. One, for me, I like to see people's faces. Two, I will leave time for a Q&A. So I'd rather have this more as a conversation. Even though we're a lot of people, we can figure that out. Okay, so here's a little bit of outline for the webinar so that we're all organized and we're all on the same page. We've already covered number one, what is welcome and introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is Theology on Tap. And then from there on, how do we make Theology on Tap successful? So I'm going to talk about having a goal, okay, for Theology on Tap. And then the specifics of what a successful Theology on Tap series could look like. We're going to talk about choosing the right topic and speaker. We're going to talk about a plan for the actual flow of the event. Okay? Don't just walk into a bar with a speaker and think that you've done everything. There's much more to this. And to make sure your team knows their role. Now, you might be saying, wait a minute, Joe, what do you mean a team? What team? We'll talk about the team. I have a few special questions that I'm going to raise from my experience, having done this for so many years. And then I'm going to leave time for a question and answer. And Laura tells me I have an hour to do this, not 3. So we'll try to get this done in an hour. All right. Please remember to keep yourself muted, but Laura can also help out with that. Unless there's a question, please type the question in the comments. Laura will alert me to any pertinent questions. And if it's a really burning question, then you can unmute yourself and interrupt me. That's okay. I'm used to it. Okay. So let's start with what is Theology on Tap. And I'm not going to keep slides up the whole time. I'd rather have this more as a conversation. But what it's not. Theology on Tap is not just an excuse to go to a bar, have a beer, and talk about Jesus. That's not, I wouldn't necessarily say talk about Jesus, but it's not a bad thing for the people who might be arriving to Theology on Tap to think that they're doing. But from you as the facilitator, that's not what this is about. So when I used to leave the office, I worked at St. Francis of Assisi in Midtown Manhattan for 17.5 years. And I would leave the office and head out to go do Theology on Tap, and my boss would be like, oh, you mean you're going to a bar and having a couple of beers? Well, if I was the presenter, and I was not always the presenter, but if I was the presenter, then I would talk and have a few beers at the end. But that's, you know, he was teasing me. But there's a lot more work that goes into making Theology on Tap a success. It's not as simple as just, let's go have a beer and talk. So what is Theology on Tap? Theology on Tap is a method of invitation. So this is an evangelization effort, fundamentally. It's a method of invitation for young adults to explore the Catholic faith and deepen their bonds of community within the church. Okay? Now, why do I say and deepen their bonds of community within the church? Theology on Tap has a topic. There's always a talk. But I would say from my experience, the talk is important, but it might be maybe 70% of what you want to have happen at Theology on Tap. Because building the bonds of community is an intentional part of what went into planning Theology on Tap. Okay, if that's not it, if you see Theology on Tap strictly as a catechetical endeavor, then people can sit home, click on a video in the comfort of their home, have a beer, and then watch a video. And there are plenty of resources for that. But the community piece won't happen. So I'm going to invite you, when contemplating implementing Theology on Tap, to always keep in mind, how are we building the bonds of community through this endeavor? Okay? So that's what Theology on Tap is. It should be a piece of your endeavors to build young adult community within the church. So this is part of a young adult ministry endeavor. Okay? At St. Francis of Assisi and at the Church of the Presentation, where I worked before that, we had active young adult ministries. Theology on Tap was an important part of that ministry in both places. It was not the only part. And we use Theology on Tap as a specific piece of that puzzle of young adult ministry. We can do a whole webinar on young adult ministry if we want, where we can talk about low-hanging fruit, when the young adults come knocking on the door and how we handle that and all those kinds of things. But this was specifically an outreach to get young adults engaged. Okay. Now, let's talk a little more about that. When you're contemplating implementing Theology on Tap, or some of you might be doing Theology on Tap, and a lot of this might be like, oh yeah, we're doing it. Well, it's good to feel reassured that you're on the right track. But my goals for Theology on Tap were always very explicit. Building the bonds of community with current young adults was one of my major goals. So what do I mean by that? Well, we all know in a parish, people will come to a church, especially a place like Manhattan. Imagine working in a Catholic church in the middle of Manhattan. We were right near Penn Station. We had people that would come to St. Francis from New Jersey, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and a few from the Bronx. All converging. Why did they converge on St. Francis? They might have liked the Franciscan friars. They might have liked the music. They might have just liked the convenience because almost every subway line in New York City and the New Jersey Transit and the Long Island trains all converged a half a block away from St. Francis of Assisi Church. So there's a lot of reasons why people wound up landing at that particular church. It meant that there was a huge challenge in building community there. So when I did Theology on Tap, one of the things that I had in mind was I wanted to get these people to know one another and to start to kind of form community. Why Theology on Tap then? Because it's a great way to get people to sign up for something. So the people who are already in the community that might have been coming to Mass, I wanted them to get to know one another. Now, I have to keep that in mind as I plan Theology on Tap, because as we'll see in a minute, that means when you structure what the evening actually looks like, you have to tend to that goal. We'll get to that. Second, give disconnected Catholics and non-Catholics a positive experience of the church. Now, that's a lot to put on let's get together at a bar. What do I mean by that? When I did Theology on Tap, when I do Theology on Tap, I always have an eye to, do we have a chance with this? That somebody who's Catholic that doesn't come to church might attend? Or even thinking further outside the box, can we get people who might not even be Catholic to come and experience the church? Now, what do I mean by experience the church in a positive way? Get to know other Catholics. Get to have a sense of, like, people have an image, especially non-Catholics, and even Catholics who leave the church, have an image of what the church is. And that image can be formed by media, can be formed by what they hear other people saying, whatever it is. This is a chance for them to experience the church through the people who attend these events and the talk that might get them to say, wow, I didn't know that about the church. I didn't know that Catholics actually thought that way. I didn't know that these are the kinds of people who go to church. I thought people who go to church all have 3 heads and a tail. I don't know. Right? So I always try to build my Theology on Tap experiences with an eye to, do we have a chance of bringing those people in also? And then, of course, third, increase in understanding among the participants about the Catholic faith. Now, those are pretty good goals. They're all achievable with Theology on Tap. Okay? So, oops, was that my last slide already? Yes. So I want to talk about these, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I forgot how do I stop? I forgot how to stop sharing my screen here.
In the toolbar, there should be a red
Oh,
button.
no, I'm on, oops, I just lost everybody, Laura. Oh, there it is. Am I back? Yes, I'm back. Okay, so let's talk about how do we achieve success? And I really I'd rather not be having constantly a slide in front of us because this is meant to be a conversation. How do we achieve success? How do we achieve those goals? The first one is you have to choose the right topic and speaker. Now, at St. Francis, we used to try to schedule these in a series of maybe 4 Theology on Taps over the course of a year. Some places try to do them more frequently. You know, you have to know your own community. You know how much time people will give. We found that doing them quarterly worked for our people. You will know your own people. You might be able to get away with doing them once a month. Okay. Some places might be able to do it even more frequently. I don't know how much time your people spend in a bar. But when you plan out your series, part of that planning should be what are the topics we want to cover and who would be a good speaker. Now, when I say what are the topics we want to cover, I was in charge of adult faith formation at St. Francis of Assisi. I covered all kinds of topics. Not every topic that I would cover in OCIA would I cover at Theology on Tap. Or in my adult faith formation series where I might be teaching the Gospel of Mark. When I'm talking about topics, think of those 3 goals. 1, you want a topic that is going to attract the young adults you already have in your pews to get them to say, oh, I might want to go to that. 2, you should have a topic that somebody who's not Catholic or has been away from the church might say to themselves, actually, I might attend this. Now, is that possible? Yes, it's absolutely possible. People are interested in these kinds of topics. So what kinds of things did we do? What kinds of topics? We did one, spiritual but not religious, question mark. That's a young adult kind of very big young adult topic. You'll hear a lot of people, and now not so young adults, saying, yeah, I'm spiritual but not religious. Well, let's talk about it. People will come to that, right? And it gives you an opportunity to talk about, well, what does it mean to be religious? Why is it like Avery Dulles has 5 models of the church? I think it's 5. 5. And institution is one of them. Well, why do I have to go someplace to talk to God? So a topic like that, spiritual but not religious, might draw people in. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about, well, why do we commit? Because that's really what religion is about. It's about committing. We did one called Seeking the Truth in an Age of Fake News. That's a very relevant topic. And people want to talk about this. People want to talk about, well, how are we going to handle all the fake news? And now with AI, it's getting worse. And what's our moral obligation to the truth? You know, we have an obligation to that. It might take work on our part to seek the truth and to kind of weed out what's not true. So we did Seeking the Truth in an Age of Fake News. In our series at St. Francis, we always scheduled a Theology on Tap on Mardi Gras. Why? Well, some crazy Catholics give up drinking during Lent, and Mardi Gras was my last chance to have a beer. So if I was going to do that, I might as well work at the same time. So we used to always schedule one. And in New York doesn't have a big tradition of celebrating Mardi Gras, but at our community, we implemented that tradition. And we would get people who wanted to just join their Catholic friends in celebrating Mardi Gras, and there was always a topic. So we did one year, how Catholic is Mardi Gras? Right? Now, people were coming to have a drink and to have, meet their friends and all that kind of thing. But when we were talking about how Catholic is Mardi Gras, does anybody have any idea what the topic was about? It was about the liturgical year. It was about living life through a seasons of feasts and fasts that feed the spiritual life. And we did get non-Catholics to come to that, and people said, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. There's something about the human experience that we don't do the same thing every day. I love that line from the Passover Seder. Why is tonight different than any other night? Right? So we had a chance to kind of showcase our spiritual tradition in something that could kind of sound frivolous, like how Catholic is Mardi Gras? Like, why are we sitting here with beads on and having a drink, and then tomorrow we're going to put ashes on our heads? Like, what are we just, is this all fun and games? No, there's actually deep spiritual reasons for having times of fasting and times of feasting. We did one, where would Jesus shop? That was one of my favorite ones because I didn't have to present. We had a parishioner, a young adult in our parish, who was in charge of social compliance for a very large retail store across the United States. And her job was to go to factories in developing countries where they manufactured anything they sold. At that, I won't mention the name of the store because she didn't in her talks. And make sure that where the clothes and other things that they would sell were being manufactured in places that respected the human dignity of the people that worked for them. So safe work environment, no child labor, safe work environment, even meaning like fire safety, escape routes, all that kind of stuff, reasonable work hours, reasonable pay. And it was her job to make sure. And she presented that, we have the power to make choices when we shop that reflect our values as disciples of Christ. Where would Jesus shop? So those are the kinds of titles that we would do during Theology on Tap. What wouldn't I do? I don't know. Transubstantiation versus transsignification. Why the 14th century is important today? No. Do I think transubstantiation is important? Yes. Do I think it's different than transsignification? Absolutely. Would I use that at Theology on Tap? Never. No. People don't speak that language. That's not Catholicism 101. That's Catholicism 401. Okay? So, I wouldn't have a Theology on Tap just called the Bible. Like, what does that even mean? Would I have a Theology on Tap that says Adam and Eve and dinosaurs? Can we believe in all of them? Yeah. People will be like, so you have a title like Adam and Eve and dinosaurs? Question mark? People will be like, oh yeah, because everybody gets like, well, what are we supposed to do with Adam and Eve? Do we toss them in the garbage? Because I've been to the Museum of Natural History and I've seen the T-Rex skeleton. No, it opens up a door for us to talk about, well, how does the Catholic Church understand the Bible? So when you're planning out your Theology on Tap, you have to look at it through the lens of evangelization. You have to pick topics that people will relate to. Not all topics that are important to the church are going to be suitable for Theology on Tap because they don't match the goals we just listed. So discern with your team, what are the topics that might attract young adults and maybe even some non-Catholics. And then the speaker. They don't have to have a PhD in theology. As I said, I use people in the parish to do presentations who were solid Catholics, but had expertise in their area professionally and were good presenters. Okay, I also know really good presenters who don't have a good time doing Theology on Tap because of the environment. I can talk over people having drinks and ordering food and all of that. Not everybody can. It takes a little getting used to the fact that you're really having a conversation in a pub or a bar or a restaurant, and people are not just sitting there theater style looking at you keeping quiet. Okay, so you have to have a speaker that can project, have a presence, and be okay with the fact that there's a din. Now, the venue, I didn't really speak too much. I didn't plan on speaking too much about the venue. Even some of our Renew materials offer different options for venues. Theology on Tap was originally intended to be done in a pub or a bar or a restaurant. It really was intended to be done in a place where people would gather anyway. And so you're talking about the faith outside of the normal buildings where you would expect that. The purpose of that was so that it was easier for people to come who might not be so comfortable attending a parish-based, meaning facility-based event. Okay? I do not recommend, and I've seen this a lot, oh, let's just do it in the parish hall, it's easier. That's not the intention. It might be easier, it's not going to achieve your goals. It's not going to be what Theology on Tap is supposed to be. Some people will say, well, what about a coffee shop? Yes, you can do a coffee shop. That's fine. People gather there. I would not discount, I understand, we have to be respectful of people who do not drink. Do not make Theology on Tap all about having drinks, even though it's part of the name. You have to be respectful of people who don't drink, but in my experience with people who are in AA or whatever, most of the time they're okay going to an event where alcohol is served, so long as they feel free that they don't have to drink. And that absolutely should be the case. But I still think that it's best done where it was originally intended to be done, which is in a bar. Okay? So choose the right topic, the right speaker who can speak in that kind of environment. I would switch up the speakers. And then the last thing is to make sure your team knows their role. Now we're going to talk about, some of you might be saying, why do you keep mentioning a team? Theology on Tap, if it's intended to be an evangelization event, it's not just about people hearing the talk. And if one of your goals, as it was mine, is to build the bonds of communion among the people who attend.
I could change your name, son.
Oh, hold on. So if that's our goal, then we have to intentionally prepare for that to be successful. So in my experience, you need to have your young adult ministry team ready to be hosts, welcomers, greeters, and people that engage the people that come. The speaker is speaking. The speaker can welcome people from the microphone, but that's different. So if you're in a parish that has an established young adult ministry team, you would have to do a little bit of formation with them. If you don't have an established young adult ministry team, introducing a series of Theologies on Tap might be a great way to get some key young adults to start to form a ministry team. You can ask them to join for a couple of months to help facilitate just Theology on Tap. Now, if your situation is that you're going to be building a team from scratch, it's going to take you a little bit longer in the ramp-up time before you do your first Theology on Tap. If you have a young adult ministry team already, then it's a matter of just working with them for them to understand their role. So when I did Theology on Tap, what did I do? I had typically a man and a woman at a table at a point convenient where people entered. Their job was to welcome everyone who came. And yes, we gave out name tags, even in Manhattan, where people try to, think they're cooler than the rest of the world. I'm like, no, you have to wear a name tag. Why? Well, it's simple, because you know what? One of the worst things in the world is that you've seen the person 2 pews ahead of you for 6 months at church. You don't know their name, or worse, you heard their name once and you forgot it. And now you won't talk to the person because you're embarrassed, because you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm not going to know their name. Everybody wears a name tag. Name tags serve a good purpose. Yeah, you know, in Manhattan, I used to tell people, just take it off before you go on the subway because it causes problems when people know your name on the subway and you don't know them. So that I would have greeters at the door. And then, because the temptation, if you do have a ministry team, and we had a very good ministry team for years, they all knew each other and they were friends. So what was their temptation? Oh, we'll just take a table and sit together. This is part of their ministry. I invited them with a strong invitation. They had to break up that night and everybody sat at a different table so that there was a representative of the parish to make sure that everybody felt included. Because ideally, you're gonna have different kinds of people come. You're gonna have high extroverts who can talk the ears off a complete stranger. And then you're going to have high introverts who, unless they're kind of welcomed into the conversation, will just sit there and be quiet. So the team going into this knew it was their role to connect with the people who arrived at the tables. Okay, so and we'll get to, I'm talking about tables, how that's going to look in a second. So you have to prepare your team to go in there and work with you to achieve those three goals. You have to get to know people, and you have to make sure everybody feels comfortable. Now, I keep saying tables. When I did Theology on Tap, I tried to find a bar or a pub or a restaurant, mostly a restaurant that served food. I mean, a bar that served food worked ideally. Why tables? Again, one of my goals was to build community. So I tried to find a venue now with where people could gather together. If they're serving food, there's going to be tables, whether they're high top tables or regular tables. There will be some place for people to sit together. So look for that kind of a venue. Just a bar where everybody has to stand is going to be less ideal. It's not impossible, but it's less ideal. Even if you're just in an environment where everybody has to stand, then what you have to do is invite your team to be strategic about where they're standing so they get to know a circle of 5 or 6 people that they're going to kind of tend to. It's spread out and conquer them. The night of the event. Again, the temptation is just jump into the talk. That only covers one of the goals. Whenever I did Theology on Tap, I did Theology on Tap like a small Christian community meeting. I still do. What does that mean? I would gather people, and yes, I would have a short, brief prayer. Sometimes we do there's some prayers that people get into. I'm like, wow, this is not a prayer. This is a speech to God. God's getting bored and I'm getting bored. A short little thank you for the good things we've experienced today, and we ask you to help us carry those burdens which we're struggling with right now. The end, let's move on. Short prayer. Remember, you're in a bar. The other thing is, people are going to want to order food and drink. You need to give them time for that to happen. What you don't want to do is lose that time. So you start the evening after the prayer saying, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm going to be the speaker. Or you might have a host who introduces the speaker. Before we get to the talk, we'd like to give you time to order your meals and get some drinks and get settled. But while you're at your tables, we ask you 3 questions. Share with one another. What's your name? Where do you come from? How long have you been at this church? Or whatever questions, icebreaker questions you can think of. In New York, it always worked to ask people where they were from because New York City, you get really interesting answers. Like we could always do, who comes from the farthest? And somebody from the Philippines will raise their hand and say, I came from Manila, and they always win. So you always do, while they're ordering their food, get to know one another kinds of questions. I mean, people have all kinds of creative questions for icebreakers. You could do at the tables 2 truths and a lie. Go around the table and try to pick out which one's the lie. Whatever it is, use that time to start to get people to know one another. Then once the food and drinks are ordered and it seems the appropriate time where there's not going to be too many waiters running around and whatever, then you start the talk. The talk should be no more than a half hour. Realistically, it should be no more than a half hour. It should be relevant to their experience. Like any good homily, it should connect with people. I've been in churches. I was at St. Francis. Don't anybody please tell the friars at St. Francis this story. Hopefully nobody ever watches this video. But I was at St. Francis for 17 and a half years, and some of the friars there never mentioned the New York City subway. So everybody in the pews had an experience of the subway. At some point, you would think that the friars preaching would mention the fact that all of us crawled underground with thousands of other people and had all kinds of weird experiences at times down there. It should show up in the homily. That's being relevant to people's experience. Would I talk about the New York City subway in Upper Saddle River, New Jersey? No, because those people usually don't go on the subway. So the talk should be relevant to their experience while exploring the topic. After the talk, you should have prepared time for people to share at the tables with specific questions, just like a small Christian community meeting, right? I wouldn't use language that I would use in a small Christian community, like, where did you hear God speaking to you in this reading? I would use more generic questions, especially that you might hope to have non-Catholics there. What did you find interesting? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What did you not know? What's new to you? Whatever the questions are, you should have ready questions to engage conversation and give the people a good 10 or 15 minutes to talk to one another. That's my small Christian community. That's where Father Tom Kleisler taught me. We don't have all the answers, and that's not our job. Our job, people in leadership in the church, is to help build the community of the church. Let them talk to one another. They will evangelize each other. Then I always left time for Q&A, because we all know that the Q&A can sometimes be the most exciting part for the participants, because they get to ask their own questions. Now, after 25 years of doing this stuff, I have learned the hard way some tips and tricks for facilitating a Q&A. Folks, one thing I never do, and Greg is probably going to shake his head yes, I never give people the microphone. Never. I never set up a microphone in the middle of a room and let people walk up to it. We have all been at talks or conferences or whatnot, where during the Q&A, they put a microphone on a stand and they let people walk up to it. And the speaker just gave a 20-minute talk that people want to talk about. And now Joe Schmo from wherever gets up to the microphone and we get another 15-minute speech. Okay? That's not the purpose of the Q&A. And it's not fair to the rest of the participants to allow somebody to monopolize that time. So I do not anymore, because I've had my lumps, I do not pass around the microphone or put a microphone on a stand and let people walk up to it, because once somebody's going to hog the mic like that, it's really difficult to pull it back. So what do? I mean, when I was in New York, we would get 40 or 50 people at a Theology on Tap. If you just let people raise their hand and ask questions, it's okay to go in with a microphone and hold it. Never let it go. And if they want to take it, don't let it go. Hold it. But in my experience, what works best and is kind of respectful for the introverts in the crowd, I always had note cards. And I had people write their questions on a note card, and I collected the note cards. Now, I did that for two reasons. It is true. I try to be respectful of introverts because they process differently. The extroverts will always drown them out if you just allow people to start talking. But if you give people a chance to write their questions down, it does give people a chance to participate who might not be comfortable just raising their hand. The other thing is whenever I introduce note cards, which should already be out on the tables, whenever I introduce note cards, I always said to the people, folks, we have like 10 or 15 minutes left for Q&A. I'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Now, I'm speaking hopefully among people who have done facilitation before. We get crazy questions sometimes. We're talking about what the Catholic Church believes about the Bible and Adam and Eve and dinosaurs, and then you get a question about who knows what, right? And you're like, well, that's not what we're talking about tonight. By doing it with note cards, it gives you or the presenter a chance to prioritize the questions that are really relevant to the topic. And if necessary, for the sake of time, you skip those questions that are off the wall, and you just apologize to everyone because you can't get to them all. Okay. The other thing that also happens is 3 people may have the same question. If you take a couple of minutes to just look through the cards, you can group them, and you're like, wow, 5 people had the same question. Let's address that one first. Okay. It's a tactic that I use. Now, you don't have to do it that way. You can walk around with a microphone or ask people to stand up and just ask their question, but it is one that I have found to be successful for myself. Again, because I've had experiences where people give a second speech. Finally, if you're going to do a series of theology on tap, right, or even just a one-off, and your goal is to give people some interesting information about what Catholics believe, so that's kind of what the talk and the conversations at the table does. But your goal is also to build up the community, so you're having meet one another, get to know your names and where you're from, and then conversation about the talk. You need to continue that work beyond the Theology on Tap. You should be there that night with, if you're doing the series, have the day, location, and time of the next one. Or have something else that's coming up. Whenever I did a fall Theology on Tap, I already had the Christmas concert ready. Those people who don't come to church will still come to a free concert at Christmas, especially when we have an excellent music ministry like we did. Yeah. The goal is keep people in the orbit of the church, keep them coming, because step by step, we're trying to get them closer to the altar, closer to the celebration of the Eucharist. It might not happen in one step, but step by step, we're trying to invite them back in. Okay, so you definitely want to come ready with what's the next invitation that you're inviting them to. Because if people have a good experience that night, you can say to them, listen, you're all here together. How many of you want to come together to this next event? Put it on your calendars. Okay, so it should be a plan of evangelization that kind of swarms around the event itself. Your participants think they're just coming to have an interesting talk and have a beer with some people. Our goal is, how do I keep them in the orbit of the church? How do I kind of continue them on the journey of discipleship or evangelization? It might be primary evangelization. All right. So that's what I think leads to a successful event. You have to have a team that's formed and ready to be welcomers and evangelizers. Okay. Now, you don't have to call them evangelizers. We know what that means. Just say that you're in charge of meeting and greeting, getting to know people. Have the right topic. Make sure that the topic is kind of, remember, you're young adults. It's engaging. It's got to be cool. Hey, that's the reality. All right. The title should be able to be on like TikTok and somebody will be like, let me click on this. And make sure that the evening includes at least 2 times where the people are talking to each other and not just listening. Okay, we're not just reinforcing that the church is, oh, there's an expert and I'm just a recipient. This is about building community. And so for real, I always did Theology on Tap as a very unique small Christian community experience. And then at the end of the night, you can just thank people for coming, have a quick closing prayer, being sensitive to those people who may be coming that are not Catholic. But do not skip the prayer for that. We have to witness who we are. But the prayer should kind of, I feel like people like gratitude. People like expressing their gratitude. and people get caught in counting what they don't have. So anytime our prayer invites people to count what they do have, even people who are not Catholic will join in, because it's a spirituality that they already instinctually recognize is helpful. Okay. Now, I'm going to start to formulate your questions, but I want to bring up a couple of questions that I've come across. One, I've already dealt with. Can you do this in another venue? Yes, but do not do it on campus. Do not call it Theology on Tap and do it in the church hall. Coffee shop, fine. I'll bring my own beer to the coffee shop. No, I won't bring my own beer to the coffee shop. What about when you get a 45-year-old that wants to come? Right? That's a legit question. I'm 53 now. I used to be a young adult doing young adult ministry. That expired a long time ago. Up until I left St. Francis this summer, was I still involved with the young adult ministry? Yeah. You do not have to be a young adult to evangelize young adults. You have to be comfortable with that age group. But that being said, if you're going to tell young adults that this is a young adult event, one of their criteria is going to be, I want to be with my peers in my age group. Then you cannot dilute that by saying anybody can come. So if you're billing the Theology on Tap as being for young adults, then it's for young adults. Now, that does not mean that you can't have a Theology on Tap for everybody. The process works. There are people who are 50 who are in the same situation of being tentatively attached to the church, or maybe they're going to church, but they don't know anybody there, or maybe they just want to listen to a topic and get to know people in their church better. Do it for that age group, but make sure you're crystal clear. If it's for young adults, it's for young adults. If you're going to do it for everybody, then do it for everybody, but advertise it as such. It's not helpful for people to start diluting the young adult ministry, because then it's no longer a young adult ministry. Okay. That is not to say that, let's say you want to welcome a couple of people from certain ministries to get to know people, like the RCIA ministry. That it's not inappropriate to have other leaders from the parish attend. But if it's a young adult event, it should be for the participants should generally be young adults.
We just got a question in, what if someone just shows up? What if a 45-year-old just shows up, even though the event was marketed to young adults?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's tough. I have told people, now, I would not ask my volunteer young adult ministry team to handle this. As a staff member of the church, I handled this myself. So it is sensitive, because the church is always supposed to be welcoming. But if we bill something as being a young adult event, it's for young adults. It's harder in a bar, because in a bar, you really can't kick anybody out, right? Usually you'll have a piece of the bar. But I have said to people, I'm sorry, this is for people, young adults in the church, which are people in their 20s and 30s. We have tons of events for other people. I'd love to talk to you. Here's my card. Give me a ring. But you cannot sacrifice the group for the needs of an individual. If you have a mission, to evangelize young adults, and somebody is going to kind of torpedo that mission because they have other needs, that's not fair to what you're trying to achieve. So it's tough. Trust me, it is tough. But I would also say, hey, we have this coming up that you could go to. With Theology on Tap, it was harder because you're in a bar. So it's a little bit different. Parish events, I have definitely told people, I'm sorry, this is not for you. The other thing is, young adult ministry, people often confuse as being a singles ministry. Okay, I have never seen it as my job in the church to get somebody a date. That's not my job. Have I tried to connect people? Yeah, but that's individually. But young adult ministry is about reaching out to a population in the church that is notorious for being somewhat absent. It is not about helping people date. So, other questions?
We have many questions waiting.
Uh-oh.
Um, other than the ones that you mentioned, off the top of your head that you executed yourself, is there any suggested list of topics that we can explore?
You know, at Renew we used to have a list, but I have to find it. It's a good challenge. I can write down some of the topics that I have come up with my young adult ministry group at St. Francis, and I'm happy to share them. I can post them on St. Francis's website. Laura, you and I can work on that. You know, we could maybe do is even create a little community of people who come up with topics and we share them with one another, because there's a lot of wisdom in this group right here gathered. I'm happy to type up mine. So yeah, Laura, why don't you and I make that a
Okay.
commitment from Renew that we'll start to, and if anybody has a suggestion that wants to include it, we'll put your title. If you want your name and your parish included, we'll put that there also. I think it'd be great so we share wisdom within the church. Yeah, I mean, I have some, again, it's also specific to your community. Like, I can share later if we have more. Let's take more questions.
Speaking of being specific to your community, we have a question. How do you find speakers? Should we look in our own parishes and communities? Is there a list of people that you suggest to be speakers? This one might be harder to compile a list only because you can do theology on tap anywhere. Um, are we really going to fly in speakers from New York or California to other parts of the world or country?
Right. I mean, if your parish has a lot of resources and you want to really bring in a ringer, I would say look at the speakers that speak at LA Congress. That's probably the
Hmm.
most comprehensive list of top-notch Catholic speakers that you'll ever find. The problem is those people are going to probably be expensive. Like LA Congress probably has the longest list of specialists in the Catholic Church. Um, by the way, I'm going to be there this year, so if anybody's going to be there, say hello. Uh, However, most parishes are going to be limited in terms of financial resources to spend on bringing people in. I would say look locally within your diocese. People know people. Come up with the topics first, and then look for people that might be good at giving that topic. Like the topic Adam and Eve and dinosaurs. However you flesh out that title, there's quite a few people that can give the basic outlines of the Catholic understanding of the Bible that could give that talk. I think people will be more interested in the conversation at the tables. You don't have to be the top-notch person if the topic itself is interesting enough. But I would ask locally first. So I'm not so sure how helpful having like a national list of Catholic speakers is going to be helpful unless your parish has a lot of money to fly people in and out and give the talk. We always went local. I was lucky I worked with the Franciscan friars in New York City, so there were at least 20 friars. I always tapped into them. I also looked within the lay people within my community that had expertise. The woman who did the one on where would Jesus shop did a great job, and that's what she did. You know, I would look locally first.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a two-part question.
Uh-oh.
Do more traditional young adults look for topics with more religious language than what you suggested? And do you have any advice for gathering that traditional section of young adults with people who are also just spirituality seekers? And how do you gather them in harmony, those two groups?
Well, in my experience, again, it goes back to the goals. For me, Theology on Tap was to connect the people who are coming to the church already with one another and reach out to people who are not coming to the church. So the more traditional young adults that find a lot of meaning, let's say in adoration and those kinds of things, one, they're already coming to the church. So if they're interested in helping us with the goal of building up the community, they should attend regardless of the topic to meet other people. I don't think it's going to serve our goals to have a topic on adoration. So again, those people are already connected and they can get talks on adoration all they want. If the goal is to reach out to people and engage with the wider Catholic audience who might not be in that category, then I would say you want those kinds of talks and things, you're already connected. Why don't you come to the talk just to meet other people? If they're not interested in meeting other people in the church and being present to the rest of the community because they want just what they want, then I would say then go find what you want someplace else. I mean, again, if the goal is evangelization, you have to stick to your goals.
So when you are introducing an icebreaker activity, what is the maximum number of people that you see it working with? Is it 10? Is it 25? Is it 50 people? Would you break them up into groups to make the icebreaker more approachable? And if people are already mingling well on their own, would you still introduce an icebreaker activity?
Yes and yes. I would say, and this is where sometimes the tables help already because it already limits. Most of the tables are not bigger than 6. But I would, in a venue like this, I would keep it to 5 or 6 people because it gets them. It's not a small Christian community meeting where everybody's quiet and sitting around and 10 people can introduce themselves. Like I would ask people to kind of gather up in groups of 5 or 6. If people are socializing with one another, that's great. At some point, I would still interrupt it because in the group, there will be those people who are new and don't know too many people. And while the people who already know each other are socializing and having a good time, you can wind up with people who are standing there by themselves having a miserable time. At least if you have the formal icebreaker at the table, it's inclusive of everyone. And if you're standing at a bar, if you wind up, and I have done them where we could only get a bar for Mardi Gras that there was only standing room, I literally asked everybody to circle up in groups of 5 or 6, standing there, and introduce themselves. So yes, I would still do the intentional icebreaker for the sake of the people who might be new.
Okay. In terms of venue, would you pick the same place each time or a different place each time?
I would pick the same place if you like it. Post-pandemic, I had a much harder time in Manhattan getting a place because the restaurants were trying to recuperate their losses for during the pandemic. And so they wanted us to pay astronomical amounts of money to use the venue. So if you find a venue that works, that people get comfortable with, I mean, our job is not to show people all around town. Like, I'm thinking like Cheers. This becomes like where everybody knows your name. Let's do that. That would be I liked the Australian in New York, which is no longer there. I always went back to the same bar. Now, speaking of which, my goal was always not to get the parish involved with prefix menus or anything like that. My goal was to go there and let people just order off the menu. And most places worked with me, they asked the parish to guarantee a certain amount of sales for the space. So before the pandemic, it was $500. Getting 40 people together in New York City, hitting a $500 mark was nothing. The most places, because it was an off night, like a Monday or Tuesday night, most places made out like bandits because we brought all these people there. But sometimes a venue would say, well, let's just do a menu and they want to sell tickets. I think that's too complicated. You can do it. I've done it. But my preference is to go to a place and say, listen, we're looking to bring in 25 to 30 people or 40 or 50, however many you think you can get. Can we have space? They're going to order off the menu. And if they say, can you guarantee $500 or whatever? Yeah, keep it within reason what you think the people coming will cover anyway.
Great.
Yeah,
It is 3 o'clock now, so I understand if anybody needs to jump off. Joe, if you have 5 more minutes for us, I do have 2 or 3
absolutely,
more questions.
for
So if
sure.
anyone is able to stay on, we can still address those now.
Yeah, if
Um,
people need to go, thank you for coming. I totally want to
thank you
respect your
so much.
time, but I'm available for a few more minutes if you want to continue the conversation.
Awesome. This is a pretty big question. We got this from a couple of different people. How would you announce or advertise or market the event beyond your normal parish channels? You know, other than putting it in the bulletin, how do you even reach the people that are not showing up in your pews in the first place? How do you get to them and let them know that you have an event for them?
Yeah. I mean, in New York, I had available to us community newspapers like by neighborhood that we would advertise certain events in, but usually they were bigger events than a Theology on Tap. Honestly, what we would do is if you're looking at a young adult audience, this is great for social media, but you have to, again, you have to start with a core team that's on board with you and ask them to invite the people they know. It all boils down to personal invitation. But that personal invitation can not only come from the pastor and the parish staff, it has to be at the next level of, of your core team and your parishioners inviting each other. Now, what's interesting about Theology on Tap, if you get good topics and good speakers, people will say to their friends, why don't you come Tuesday night? I'm gonna go listen to talk. You want to come with me? I've had friends come only because I was speaking that are not Catholic. They're like, okay, Joe, if you're going to be there speaking, I'll come. And it engages them. So I would say use social media, have your people invite their own friends to come. I don't know how successful you'd be advertising in a newspaper or whatnot. But at the end of the day, folks, I'm still a big believer, even in this day of mega technology and all of that, personal invitation is irreplaceable. We all know you can see an ad for a movie on Instagram. You could read great reviews about a movie. You could see previews about a movie. But if your best friend tells you you got to see this movie, you go see the movie. That's still true, thank God.
We touched on this briefly earlier in the session, but would you invite participants to other parish events as well? And what kinds of events? I know you said having an invitation for evangelization at the end is important, but what would you invite them to join?
I would invite them at St. Francis. We always did a young adult Friendsgiving. I would invite them to that. The Christmas concert, I would invite them to. You know, if you're doing this close to Advent or even in Advent, you could invite people to the Christmas masses. You know, people complain like, oh, they only show up at Christmas and Easter. Well, thank God they show up at Christmas and Easter. You have them. It's our job to make sure they might consider coming back the week after Christmas. Okay, that's New Year's. Nobody's coming. The week after that, I mean. So, I mean, you know, we can bemoan the reality of so many of our friends and family members don't go to church, or we could try to do something about it in a positive way. So I would say, you know, figure out what in your parish would continue to engage people and might be interesting to them to come to. At St. Francis, we tried to have two tiers of events. We had all hands on deck events that every ministry and everybody in the parish was invited to. So there was no competing with the all hands on deck events. And then we had ministry specific events. So if you have that kind of structure where you think like, oh, people might be interested in coming to this, then why not? But it all depends on the parish. Like we didn't have a parish picnic because where are we going to picnic? On 31st Street? But some people might. And that might be something to be like, hey, we're all going to like, you know, a tailgate at the parish. Why not? If I was in a suburban parish now, I would probably do a tailgate Sunday, and I'm not a sports fan. I just like tailgating. Open up the trunk and have a tailgate with, and you know, get a screen and put the game on. Like now in New York, we have like I think the Yankees are in it. I would totally do a tailgate and put
Wonderful.
the game on. Another
We
question? Maybe
we
one
have,
more?
can we ask three if two of them are really quick?
Yeah, go for Laura. You're my boss today.
Oh, I like this day. What percentage of new people did you experience when you were running Theology on Tap in New York from session to session?
It depended on the topic. When we did Where Would Jesus Shop, it tended to be more people already at the church, but it was a really good event. When we did Seeking the Truth in the Age of Fake News, I would say we got about 15% more new people. It did depend on the topic, but I would say, yeah, you could easily get 10 to 20% new people at each event because people are inviting their friends. People are comfortable in, that's the whole point of Theology on Tap. You can say to your friend, hey, I'm going to a talk about dinosaurs and Adam and Eve, but it's at a bar. Do you want to come on Tuesday night? And their friends might say, like, okay, I have nothing to do. Let's go. They won't necessarily come to, what's going on at the church.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you can have success with getting people. But again, all the more reason your team has to be ready at the tables to say, hey, we'd love to see you again. Would you like to come to something else? And if they're Catholic, if the person at the table expresses that they're Catholic, to say to them, like, our church has a great music ministry. You should try Mass at our church. Or our church has a great preacher. You should try Mass at our church. Like, people have to be ready to make that invitation. But that comes in the team formation before you get there.
And did you have any retention problems getting people to come back, given the amount of times? I know you said it was about quarterly, so that would be about
We
once
did
every
it quarterly.
3 months. Did you have trouble
Quarterly,
coming back?
quarterly seemed to work for us in Manhattan because people expressed that they were too busy to do more. You're always gonna lose people. We're not gonna make everybody happy, and you're always gonna get new people. I love when the disciples asked Jesus if they should call down fire and brimstone on the towns that didn't accept Jesus's message. And Jesus must have shaken his head, and he's like, no, just move on. Like, that's what it means to shake the dust off your sandals. He's like, just move on. I think we worry too much about the people who don't accept the message, and it blocks us from worrying about the people who are there and ready to receive it. So don't worry about them. Don't worry about the people who don't come back. Unless there's something wrong with what we're doing. You know what I mean? Like, if the topics are boring to everybody, that's different. I forgot to mention this. You should have 5 or 6 questions quick on a half a sheet of paper that people can fill out that says, the talk was good, I like the people, like a little survey.
Little survey.
And suggestion for future topic. Short, brief, like not 2 sides of a page that people have homework to do to fill out. Like something really quick, like 1 to 5. Did you like it? Was this meaningful to you? Whatever. And I would, leave room for suggested topics and other suggestions.
Wonderful.
It's always good to get a little feedback from people. Yeah, we had a great success with Theology on Tap at St. Francis. The pandemic hurt a lot. I mean, we all know that. But now we're in rebuilding mode. We're still here. We have a chance to rebuild. Somebody just wrote, in Cleveland, we do 2 sites once a month. One gets 100 people, the other gets about 20 to 25. But every once in a while, the lower site gets 65. Now, I'm interested in Cleveland. When you get 100 people, is that a parish-based or diocesan-based?
It's diocesan, Joe.
Okay. So, Deacon Mike, I've always worked in parish ministry, and New York City, the Archdiocese of New York, did Theology on Tap, and so did St. Francis. To my mind, our goal is to build up parish communities. So when the diocese starts to provide ministries that really are appropriate for the parish, we have a little bit of an issue here. Now, if you're getting 100 people, that sounds like it might be kind of successful. But then if I were in the diocese, I would try to gather people by parish. What church do you go to? Get the people who are attending from each parish to know one another. Because what is the point of them coming to a venue? Maybe they learned some information about Catholicism, but then they're going back just as lonely as they came. We have a pandemic of loneliness going on right now. And the church has always been about community. I don't know if a diocesan event that, yeah, maybe they boast, oh, we had 120 people at this event, but people might come and go feeling alone. So there's a different challenge. I'm not saying don't do it, but I would say, how do we connect these people back to a parish? That's the question. I would not say don't do it, but I sometimes feel like the diocese forgets that these people are celebrating the Eucharist someplace, hopefully, and we want to connect them with each other.
Yeah, we sit people together by parish most of the time and kind of mingle them up. and then they can invite them back. Because then we even let the parishes advertise and things like that.
Yeah,
I was just gonna add, Deacon and Joe, that what we do we do about 3 big events a year for the diocese. And then I have a list of all the active young adult parishes. So people have that when they take it home if they're not in one of those. And usually the flyers that I have on the table are all the parish events that they have for
great.
young adults.
See, that's
you know?
exactly the vision then. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, when you're doing it at a diocesan level, then you might have the resources to bring in some really great speakers. So, yeah.
We still
You
go
know.
local, but yeah.
Well, there's nothing wrong with local.
I spend money on food.
So do you guys then spend the money on, you actually pay for some of the food and drink?
We put a spread out of different, like finger food, appetizer things. They could order off the menu if they want, and that's a little bit better food. But we
I was
can't.
always too cheap.
Yeah, we can't buy alcohol. It's the only thing. That's a diocesan no.
I'm sure they'll take care of themselves. We never bought, it was my thinking on the whole thing was I set up too many refreshments at the parish. When I did Theology on Tap, I'm like, you're on your own. And they're adults, they're fine with it. You know?
Do you see putting that spread out as like really helping that retention, Deacon?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I don't think everybody comes just because we have free food. I mean, you get free food in a lot of different places, but I think it's just a way that the diocese shows hospitality. Like for years, the diocese was very distant from parishes in general, and so we're trying to change that, become more friendly, so that when we call our parishes, they say, "Oh, it's Mike calling," not "Oh, good Lord, the bishop's office is calling." And the same with the young adults. Like the young adults know my face, they know who I am. I walk around and say hi to people and tell them what my role is. And the food is just hospitality.
And folks, to be successful, don't be afraid to be a little edgy. Like if you want to get young adults and you want to engage, especially people who are kind of hesitant about coming back to the Catholic Church, especially that it's off site, it gives you a little freedom to be a little bit on the edgier side. Like I said, with evolution and the Bible, it's a great topic people are really interested in. Be edgy with the title. Because it's going to open up an opportunity for you to say, in the Catholic Church, we actually have some very sophisticated thinking about the Bible. So, we're not fundamentalists. Like, what does that mean? Most people don't even know that.
I'd love to hear more about that. I had a 4th grader ask me that question last week. Didn't know what to say in a classroom of 8-year-olds about evolution and the Bible.
It's difficult with children because but they can start to get it. They understand what a fable is, and they understand different genres. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Mm.
The very last question that someone wrote in
Last one.
was about the licenses. Can you talk a little bit about the costs involved with the licenses, what they include, what are the different license options? I know we have for dioceses, for parishes, for non-church organizations like the Knights of Columbus, things like that. Can you speak to those choices a little bit?
Sure. Well, so people pay for the license because it is a copyrighted program, and we have an arrangement with the Archdiocese of Chicago to help parishes implement it. One of the things that with the license comes, Renew loves manuals, but they actually are very helpful. Everything that I've spoken about is really in depth in a manual that now we're making downloadable, so we don't have to worry about shipping costs and all of that. And this comes with the license, and this really even helps you form that team that I've been talking about. If you're going to do a diocesan effort, you could back up 6 months and say, okay, every parish that wants to participate in Theology on Tap has to have a young adult ministry team that attends and is ready to welcome people that might be from their parish. So you have representatives from each parish. Well, this is one of the things that you get. That we have diocesan level licenses. I don't know. Well, I'm only 6 weeks here at Renew, and I'm trying to learn everything. So I don't have off the top of my head what the costs are, but there's also parish-based licenses. Honestly, even Knights of Columbus sometimes ask us for licenses. I bet you the Knights would do a good job with this. I bet you Theology on Tap would be something they would be good at. But anyway, so we have different levels, and the resources are kind of the same, but the resources are really about this kind of very practical information on how to make it work. And we're going to make that as a downloadable. If it's not there now, it will be within like the next 2 weeks at most.
And also, if you have questions about the specific license costs, what I can do is in the email that will include the link to this webinar recording, I can include the link to all the license options, and you can feel free to reply to that email if you have any questions, any comments that you want us to address, and we can start a personal conversation to help you navigate what the right choice is for you.
Hey, Joe,
Yes.
this is Chris Reese. I know you know my wife, Denise.
Yes. Oh my God, Chris, how are you?
Good, wonderful presentation. And
Thank you.
since the Knights were brought up, I feel I should comment. As a former Grand Knight and PGK of our council, 783 in Summit, serving 3 parishes in New Jersey, we have been offering the Theology on Tap to all who were interested in attending, and to hit some of the points, but not all the points that you bring up, and you brought up some really good points. And we have had great success in getting attendance. Our primary motivation was to engage more people and to use it as a recruitment tool, but it did work. We've had marginal success, but we've had great success, and it's been really received as a community and parish event at the parishes where we've hosted it. And we hosted at local venues in Berkeley Heights and in New Providence.
No, that's great. And so long as you're clear on your goals, which you are, and the people understand whether it's a young adult event or not, if it's open to all. Again, I mean, trust me, I know a lot of people who are in their 50s that would love to go to Theology on Tap, and that's totally fine, you know, or 60s or 70s. All right, everybody. I hope this was helpful. I know I can tend to speak fast. I'm trying to slow myself down now that I don't live in Manhattan anymore. But I hope the information was helpful. And if you're considering doing this, it is a great process. Take the time to build it the proper way, get your people on board, and have a good time with it, because it's also a fun way to do ministry, and you don't have to clean up the parish after you're done. It's like practical reasons for us to do it.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. Definitely keep an eye out for the link in the email. And
I'm also doing a webinar on Advent coming up in November.
we
right?
have a couple upcoming webinars. We have fostering honest discussions over controversial topics.
Oh,
and
yeah, I
how to
forgot
overcome
that.
polarization is November 12th. And we do have Advent in English coming up on November 14th. And we also have that in Spanish and Haitian Creole on that Tuesday and Thursday. If anyone's interested, you can visit our events page and explore all the upcoming options. But thank you.
Folks, my email is on the website also. If anybody wants to contact me, you're also more than welcome to. And I'm always happy. Renew is here. If you need assistance, if you want help forming your teams or whatever it is, please contact us. Our ministry is to be a ministry to parishes and dioceses and evangelization. Okay, so that's what we're here for.
Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much.
Take care, all. Thank you for your time.